Angel of light, come into me. Show me what I need to see.
Hi, my name is Pauline with PaulineVictoria.com. We've been having a conversation where you've sent me your questions, and in response to your questions, I've sent a video or posted a video addressing your questions or concerns. Now, those questions have ranged from how do I do certain things in my life to more universal life questions. There have been some questions that have come up that I think a lot of us ask ourselves at some point in our lives. And sometimes a lot of these questions don't even get answered or addressed. Well, for these questions, I wanted to invite a friend of mine and have an actual conversation and give you an inside view into that conversation. My friend's name is Ashlie-Garen. She's an expert in receiving. And through these videos, not only do I hope that we can help you process these questions for yourself in your own life, but also get to know a little bit more about Trey. She is someone I admire and I am championing, and would love for you to get to know her as well. So hope you enjoy our conversation. Hi, Trey. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you.
The question that we're going to be talking about today is about self-love and self-acceptance. Somebody wrote into me and talked to me a little bit about their almost hatred for themselves, and how they self-loathe themselves, and they wanted to know how they are seeking out to learn how to love themselves and to accept themselves for who they are. And I thought it was an interesting question because it's something that I have had to struggle with, and I think a lot of people have had to struggle with throughout their lives, especially women. I think have thought about this type of question. And I know that we've had a conversation regarding this question ourselves about loving ourselves, accepting ourselves for who we are. And the conversation that we've had in the past was so poignant and powerful, that I think it could bring value to other people who might be also thinking about how to love themselves more and accept themselves more. So I just want to kind of relive that conversation a little bit and talk about it from our own perspectives, and hopefully those of you that are watching will be able to start thinking for yourself based on the conversation that we're going to have today. So I know that, like I said, we've had this conversation about self-love and self-acceptance, and I can speak from personal experience. Growing up, probably during starting junior high time, it became really difficult to accept myself, to love myself, because I stuck out so much. I can't hide the fact that I don't have arms and legs and kind of blend in with the crowd. So I know it's something that I had to work through and process for myself in terms of comparing myself to other people, in terms of just being different and embracing my uniqueness and who I am on the inside, who I am as, and we're going to be delving into this more, as a spiritual being having a human experience. And you know, just I'm so grateful to be now where I am, because I've had the experience where people have come up to me, or that we become really good friends, and they're like, oh, let's go to this place or come over to my house. And I have to be like, oh, is it accessible? And they're like, oh, I keep forgetting that, you know, that you're in a wheelchair. And it's like, wow, how do you forget that I'm in a wheelchair and have, you know, missing arms and legs? And, but what I've come to understand as someone who's older now is that they forget because they see me for me. My spirit transcends the physical being, that they don't even process what I look like on the outside. It changes it for them. And I've had people come up to me and say, wow, how do you have such a whole spirit? And, I think I'm so grateful to be where I am, like I said, now, where I can see myself. When I close my eyes, I don't see myself as broken or missing anything. I am completely and whole as anybody else. And I don't, and that allows me to help other people see that in me too. But it's nothing magic. I don't have any special powers to make people, see an illusion of what I am or different from what I am. But it's just experiences, and those are true, honest experiences that I've had in my own personal life. And so, I've definitely talked enough and gotten on my soapbox. So I want to hear from you, Trey, a little bit, and I know we will capture some of the conversation that we've had in the past, but I know you have a beautiful way of talking about this as well. So what's your experiences and thoughts on self-love?
I find it really interesting that this is our first conversation, that this is the topic of our first conversation. Everything always has a reason and always has a purpose. This topic hits very close to home for me for a whole bunch of reasons. Just for a bit of background, I'm 5'11". I was this tall when I was 12. And when I was 8, I grew 6 inches in 4 months. And I was very awkward, very, very awkward. I had to use crutches because my muscles in my legs were stretching so bad. I had such pain, and I never really came into my body until probably into my late 30s or into my 40s, when I started taking Pilates and I started learning about how to be in my body. And my weight fluctuates. I give or take 20, sometimes up to 30 pounds between different months. I have like all different kinds of clothes because my weight fluctuates so much. But physical attributes aside, I think the biggest thing for me accepting myself has been my own emotional well-being. I have struggled a great deal with feeling wanted and feeling loved and feeling accepted. And I can't remember a time in my life when it wasn't like that. And I've been very toxic emotionally. And one of the things that I've learned a lot in the last few years with the journey that I've been on is that we carry stories about ourselves. We have beliefs about ourselves that we hang on to. And even if they're not serving us anymore, even if they're painful, even if they are truly just not life-giving, we'll hang on to them because they're familiar.
Mm-hmm.
They may not be comfortable. As a matter of fact, they may be downright uncomfortable, but we hang on to them because they're familiar. And I'll speak accountably that I, even as recently as a couple of months ago, had a huge aha around how I was behaving. Because what happens is we hang on to these stories, and not only do these stories inform us about ourselves, they start creating behaviors that turn into self-fulfilling prophecies.
Mm-hmm.
We literally teach others how to treat us by what we think and what we believe of ourselves.
Yeah. I can remember, especially in junior high, I was not confident. I felt awkward. I felt like I didn't belong. And it was funny because I found more evidence of I didn't belong. But then when I hit a certain point in high school and I was starting to feel that confidence and I was starting to feel more accepting of who I am, I found more evidence of that. I was more accepted. I did belong more. And so I can attest to that thought process.
And we all have them. I mean, we've all got stories. We've all got things that we're not happy with.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the points that I try to bring to the forefront right away, particularly with the complimentary video series and Success of Receiving, is that every single one of those things originated with thought. Whether it was a thought that you came up with yourself or whether it was a thought that somebody else came up with that you decided to adopt and make your own. It started out with a preconceived thought, a preconceived result of something that had to be attained or had.
Mm-hmm.
And when we don't see ourselves measuring up to that, when we don't see ourselves attaining that, then we start getting down on ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
The good news is we get to learn. The good news is we learn that. And we get to choose. We get to learn something else. And when we start to look at how we learned it in the first place, not just what we learned, but how we learned it, and we take a look at how we're thinking about ourselves, because the feelings come right after. Every time we have a feeling of being in that self-loathing place,
Mm-hmm.
there's a thought that originated it. And when we start to understand that part of how we learn is by comparison, I mean, we beat ourselves up, right?
Yes.
Like if I grab this pen,
Mm-hmm.
and I ask you, is this pen small or big?
I would say small.
How do you answer that question? You think it's small?
Yeah.
As compared to this?
No. Then it's big.
Now it's big.
Yeah.
But what about as compared to my water bottle?
Then it's small.
Right? It's called the law of relativity. Everything is relative. Whatever it is that you're looking at is relative to something else.
Mm.
We hear about this all the time. You witness someone who is in a worse situation than you are, and it makes your problems seem like nothing.
Right.
You compare your problems to someone who looks like they're on top of the world, and your problems look monstrous.
Mm-hmm.
It's the law of relativity. It's about our perception. And if we start to look at that, if we start to look at how we learn, and that by nature, as human beings, how we learn is about comparison. It's about comparing. Then we can approach ourselves with a little more awareness. We can approach ourselves with a little more understanding. We can approach ourselves with a little more compassion and go, okay, somewhere along the line, I chose this thought. And chances are you chose it out of survival. You chose it because somewhere along the line, that thought made you stronger, or it made you more resilient, or it protected you, or something made you unique even. Okay, so somehow along the line you chose that thought and you put a spin on it and it helped you. But now it's not helping you anymore. So we have the chance to choose. And I want to touch on what you were talking about being spiritual beings having a human experience.
Yes.
Is it okay if I go there?
Yes, please.
Okay. There's a metaphor that I use now a lot. I hadn't used it for quite some time. I used it years and years ago, and then kind of it fell off the bandwagon, and now it's come back.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the metaphor of a rose. When I ask you to think of a rose, what do you think of? Well, people automatically think of a flower. They think of a bloom. That's what we identify as a rose.
Mm-hmm.
But what about everything else? There's the root ball. There's the feeder roots. There's the trunks or the stems. There's the leaves. There's the thorns. There's all those, and roses are notorious for sometimes taking 2 or 3 years before they actually bloom.
Yes.
To take root, to mature, to come into a place where they can support that big, beautiful blossom. If we truly believe that we're spiritual beings having a human experience and not the other way around, and let's use some different language, because some people have pushback on the word spiritual. They think it's very religious. And I'm not talking religion at all. I'm talking about energy. I'm talking about that thing that is us, that is less physical than what we perceive of as the physical.
Okay.
If we are truly going to entertain that thought, some of us have adopted that thought, and I wonder out loud, with those of us who have adopted the thought, it's one thing to adopt it and it's one thing to give lip service to it, but how many of us really have thought it through? How many of us really have explored what that means? And then there are those who have never even heard that thought before. Maybe some of the people who are viewing this video right now have never even thought of it before, and they're just even now entertaining the thought, let alone adopting it. But let's presume that we're going to play with that thought for the moment. If that's the case, our human experiences, our human existence, this matter that we are perceiving ourselves to be on this planet, is the equivalent of the flower. It's the equivalent of the bloom.
Mm-hmm.
But what about everything else that's underneath? Everything else that's underneath is still the rose, but we don't think of it as the rose. We only think of the rose as being the flower. So if someone has a mental state or an emotional state or a physical state, and if you don't want to use the word state, use the word shape, use the word form, use whatever it works for you. If I use the word shape or form, it tends to bring up the physical more than the mental and the emotional, and I'm talking about all aspects of being at this point, so use whatever word works for you.
Mm-hmm.
Then what results, and I'm going to use the generic word of a result, what results is a product of everything else that came before. You are a product of everything else that came before. Your experiences, your thoughts, your questions, your answers, everything. Your energy. Therefore, whatever that result is perfect. It is an exact representation of all that came before and all that exists that is behind or undergirds. I'm not just talking about time. I'm not just talking about time. I'm talking about all the little pieces of the puzzle that come in and undergird that result.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, where you are is perfect. Now let's take the idea of a plant even further. You take that plant and you take that plant that is, let's just say it's in a pot and it's in a house. If you move that plant and you make a choice to move that plant, what happens to the plant?
It shifts.
It shifts, right? It will turn to wherever the light in the room is.
Mm-hmm.
You make the choice, the physical shifts to what it needs.
Mm-hmm.
We can do the exact same thing. We are now in a place, physically, mentally, and emotionally, and spiritually, that is a result of the choices that we've made. We're the equivalent of the potted plant sitting in the pot that's been sitting in the same place all the time and has never moved. So move the plant. Actually, if moving the plant is too big of a leap, turn the pot an inch or two.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to tackle everything. Just one little thing, one little thought, just the slightest thing that's different. If you water that plant slightly differently, it's going to respond. If you move that plant in the room, it's going to respond. We're the same way. Why would we be any different? Nature is nature. Growth is growth. There is no difference. And we can choose. We can choose little bits. And I'm still choosing.
Yes.
We're all still choosing.
Yep.
And I believe that everyone is exactly the shape, the size, the mental state, the emotional state they need to be in that moment. We are perfect in our imperfection.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's not always easy. Yeah, it doesn't always look rosy. Yeah, life sucks sometimes.
Mm.
And even the most beautiful, magnificent roses truly came from dirt.
Yes. It's a beautiful metaphor. And that is why I invited you to the conversation. I think, yes, it just feels good. That feels good. And, I think for those of you, I know that Trey and I, we have spoken for hours and hours and hours on end. And we could probably continue doing that, but for the sake of this conversation, where this is just scratched the surface. Like I said, I admire Trey. She is a brilliant teacher, and I would encourage you to get to know more about her. She is offering a complimentary video series on www.6acts.com. That's www.6acts.com. Go there, learn more about her, because like I said, this is just barely scratching the surface, and we're going to continue having Trey I'm going to continue engaging with Trey in a conversation to talk about some of these other life questions that have come up. And if you have a question that you would like to see on Conversations with Pauline, maybe Trey and I will talk about it. Maybe it'll just be me. But please feel free to put in the comment section below your question, or email me directly at paulinevictoria.com. Again, thank you so much. We hope that this has helped you start thinking about this topic in your own life, and maybe identify what little things you can shift, what things you can choose to shift in order for things to change in your way of looking at your self-love. And so thank you so much again, and until we meet again, be blessed.
Angel of light, come into me, show me what I